it's not an easy task that you have still there, especially in a Web3 world. How do you find it so far, the task?
Well, I think my co-founder, Brooklyn Zelenka, and we did some core work with Ethereum. I helped run some of the early Ethereum Magicians unconferences, helped make the Ethereum Magicians Discourse Forum a place for discussion, and Brooke ended up doing core work on the Ethereum virtual machine. What we found is obviously a lot of these things with smart contracts and blockchains has lots of new things that you have to learn, not just new things to learn, but that are themselves just in the process of being built and evolving. And so new for everyone. So everyone's starting on the ground floor. What we found is that a lot of the time, a lot of the challenges came with the regular Web2 stuff. It's too hard to build a full stack application. As a developer, you have to become a full stack developer to build full applications. So while blockchains and similar systems add a sort of back end as a service, there's still all of these other components. And so what we realized is that perhaps there was a way to use these distributed systems and cryptography and content addressing to make these things easier so that developers wouldn't have to end up running Ruby on Rails or Python or Node.js server, which sort of defeats the purpose of having a decentralized backend. And I'd say generally, yes, this is a hard task, a big step, a task of doing things differently, but also that it's important that we have these things as components when, in comparison, we look at the three American corporations that run the major hyperclouds and say, maybe we want some computing, some edge computing to be run more broadly than just those three companies.
That is something that is like music to my ears, man. No, seriously, because I have been in this field for a long time. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of projects, developers, of course, they really don't make that distinguish between Web 2 and Web 3 stack. And a lot of them assume that by building certain something that they can label it as Web 3. And very often, as we have seen, that is not the case. And very often, and it leads to really big problems in the industry and misleads where people take it. In your personal opinion, do you think that today what we label as Web3 or call Web3, I mean, you mentioned yourself, it's very difficult to create that stack. How far away do you think we are on our journey as Web3 to really become Web3 and not Web3 dependent on Web2?
So I was around in building software in the transition, open source software, and in the transition from Web 1 to Web 2. And I remember at a certain point, a lot of people really hating on the term Web 2, in part because it had been captured. There was a Web 2 conference in San Francisco that I remember that I think tickets were $2,000. And I was in San Francisco at the time. So I just hung out in the lobby outside of where the paid areas was. And so we hung out with some of our friends. I think Web3, unfortunately, I think it's something important for us to address. I ended up choosing to use that term. I believe that edge computing, which is where Fission focuses, is a superset of just blockchain technologies, distributed systems, cryptography, content addressing. These are computer science and programming language primitives. They're not owned by anyone. And it shouldn't be a kind of purity test of, are you Web3 enough? So in some ways, we have to go back and say, well, what do we mean by this? And so how far along are we on our journey? Well, we're currently in the journey where a bunch of grifters and various bad actors have made the term Web3 be a bad term for many people. I don't really know what to do about that other than to showcase good things that are happening. There's sort of a parallel or related movement that we'll call the label DWeb. And I'd say another related term would be Fediverse, originally meaning sort of activity pub standards that's happening with Mastodon as a lot of people migrate to that, but also other P2P systems like Secure Scuttlebutt or Matrix Protocol or libp2p and so on. So lots of words, lots of different directions, Web3, DWeb, Fediverse. So in some ways, I think that we have to go back to first principles and say what we mean by these things. Let's make it so that we have portable identifiers. DIDs is one of the things that Fission focuses on. That's not just blockchain accounts. Let's focus on user privacy. Most blockchain systems are completely transparent. You see every single transaction, and every single action you take can be fully correlated. That's bad. It's really bad. And we just kind of accept it as normal, right? And so we need to work on some of those things. So what Fission is doing is it's focusing on building a stack that is an edge computing stack that can address Web 2, no blockchain, but also Web 3. If you want to add encrypted data, you can include some of the stacks and standards that we built on top of IPFS. If you want to have actions that happen off chain, which we do, that's the entire web is off chain if you think about it. So I think we need to have a more nuanced approach to some of these things. I'd like to see a focus on user-owned data. So many people in the blockchain-centric space are like, I have my account, so I own every single one of those transactions that I made on there. Not wrong, based on cryptographic principles and everything else like that, but it's still kind of far away, and usually the user doesn't cache that stuff locally to them. So things like light clients are going to be interesting to me. But to more correctly answer your question and shut up for a moment rather than just monologuing, I think we've made really good progress. I think right now, when you're interviewing me, we're 10 days, 2 weeks into this amazing flourishing of people looking past Twitter and saying, maybe I do want to join a shared server and move on to social media that is run by small servers powered by Mastodon or Pleroma or other ActivityPub software. And I think that's a really exciting turning point that I personally haven't seen since the early 2000s.